The first home I bought, I thought I was just getting taken to the rack in terms of price. I should have bought 10 of them. Those homes are selling for 3 or 4 times what I paid for that first home.
Are we headed for another 2008 collapse?
The worst decision I ever made in real estate is not getting in sooner.
Welcome to another segment of If Your Money Could Talk. I'm your host, Ben Driggs, longtime financial advisor and president of Navigate Financial. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about mortgages, lending, credit, and the like. We appreciate your spending a few minutes with us. And today in the studio, we have Jim Barnett. Jim is a longtime real estate guru and mortgage lender. And I've known him for many years and really appreciate his expertise. Appreciate him coming into the studio today. So let's begin. Jim, why don't you introduce yourself? Welcome. Appreciate your joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's change gears here a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about what's happening in the housing market today. Tell us what are some trends here. This is a national podcast, right? So what are things happening around the country? Are there trends? What are the major trends? Are there some problems out there? Some systemic problems that maybe regulators are concerned about? Are we headed for another 2008 collapse or something? What's the environment?
Okay, I get asked that question a lot. On my own website, I'm doing a little blog thing right now about that question because I get asked all the time: Are we in a bubble? Home prices are up. Rates are up, and normally when mortgage rates come up, home prices will generally come down, which has not happened. So people are thinking, oh, wow, when's the other shoe going to drop, and are we in this bubble, and am I going to lose all the value in my home? Are prices going to decline significantly? And the answer is no, they're not. For several reasons. One, just being demand is still really high and supply is still low. Back to my, and initially when we talked with higher mortgage rates, people don't want to sell because they don't want to get a new. They're going to sell my house. I got to go buy another house. And if I don't have cash, I'm going to pay a higher interest rate. So I'm just going to hold on to my house I've got. Mm-hmm. I might do a home equity line to remodel to make the house more what I want.
So that right now the inventory is less because fewer people are moving because for the reasons you just explained. And therefore that supply is softer.
Correct.
So demand is still
stay the same.
The same. And so therefore prices continue to be propped up, if not even more.
Correct. And I have seen a slight slow in the last 30 days. I've got just a couple of listings right now, and I've noticed on a daily basis there's more active listings than there historically has been over the last, say, year. Meaning at any given time there might be 1,000 active listings in the Salt Lake market. That number is totally fictitious, but let's say it was 1,000. Yeah. That's crept up to say 1,100 or 1,200. I think there's like 13,000 active listings right now, but the number has gotten bigger in terms of the number of active listings as to what it has been historically.
Mm-hmm. And that's in Salt Lake City.
That's Salt Lake City or Utah.
And
we're
we're located in Salt Lake City, of course. But how about nationally? What do you see?
I don't keep my tabs as much on nationally, but nationally it's across the board. So there's the National Association of Realtors has an economist that works for them. His name is Lawrence Yoon. I track him pretty religiously. He's been great. He's been pretty spot on. And I was reading an article on him just a couple days ago, and he said that there are 70 million more Americans today than there were in 1995. And the reason he brought that statistic up is because consequently that the demand or the number of buyers in the market or the number of people that need housing has gone up significantly more than the number of homes that have been built. And so across the board nationwide, there's still a shortage of homes in terms of what's being built. And you drive around Salt Lake and you see all these apartment buildings and condos and townhouses. It's like, wow, how can there be a shortage? There's so many. I mean, every corner there's high-rise housing, this condensed housing. And I think in my mind's eye, how can we be short? But we are. And there's still people living in mom and dad's basement or mom and dad living in kids' basement nationally. And it kind of everyone's been on the sidelines saying, well, rates are too high. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to wait and see. And I'm finally seeing people saying, well, I can't wait and see anymore. I've got to get off the sidelines. And so people that were on the sidelines are now coming out of the woodwork. I had 4 of those clients from January through April. I had 4 clients that were on the sidelines last year, finally said, I can't be on the sideline anymore. And they jumped into the market. And I'm seeing more people do that.
As buyers or sellers?
As buyers.
As buyers.
Sellers are coming on slowly, but the sellers are being definitely more slow about it. But the buyers, I'm talking more about buyers right now that were on the sidelines that are now saying, okay, I'm ready to buy. I can't wait. I got to get I call it getting on the escalator. I got to get on that escalator because at some point they might buy a smaller condo or buy
now this is
smaller.
first time,
and these specific clients are all first time home buyers. But I have people that are second, third, fourth, second home buyers, and they too have been kind of on the sidelines, but now they're
saying, hey, this could be going on for years, so we might as well get on.
Because they said the Fed's going to drop rates, and the Fed has not dropped rates. Even Lawrence Yun, again, he thinks there'll be 6 to 8 drops in the rate by the end of 2025. So that's about a year and a half from now. Now, how much those drops will be, we don't know.
Yeah.
But people are just saying, you know what, I guess I'll just bite the bullet, and then I'll refinance when I need to, when the time comes, I'll refinance, assuming rates do come down at the time. But I agree. Another question I get asked is it a bad time to buy because where rates at? And my answer is, there's never a bad time to buy real estate. I think real estate's one of the best investments you can make, and I think that there's never a bad time. I think there's better times than others to buy, obviously, but that's hindsight. And you never know that till after you did it. I mean, I look back at the properties I purchased, and every one of them was a great situation. I just wish I would have bought 10 properties instead of 1 at the time I bought them.
Yeah.
Now, some of those times I bought maybe a better time than another, but all of them ended up being great deals for me.
Well, they're an investment, just like stocks.
Yeah, and
it's the same concept. You're owning something,
yeah,
and over time, assets appreciate in value.
Absolutely.
That's just the way finances work. It's worked there for the last hundreds of years. And I mean, there's no guarantee.
No,
right?
there's no guarantee.
but it's kind of how the world works.
Yeah.
And you could say, oh, I bought it at a bad time. But with enough time, eventually these things appreciate in value.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have clients call you
on a diversified basis, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you have clients that call you that you just put them into a stock or a mutual fund or something, and then the next day something happens in the market, it goes down. They call you and say, "What are you doing, Ben? Why did you?" And I've had the same thing. In 2008, I had several clients call me and say, "Why did you tell me to buy a house? I've lost, maybe not 50%, but I've lost 20 or 30% of my value." I'm like, just like you tell people, write it out. You hang on, ride out the storm. And some people panicked. Their foreclosures got really high. People walked away from their homes because they thought they were upside down. If they would have hung on, those homes have doubled in value since that time.
Same concept. They walked away just like selling their stock when
it's like that people panic. And
getting back to the trend of the market, it seems to me that a counter argument or an argument for buying that should give people comfort coming in, particularly first-time home buyers. They say, "Oh gosh, it's so expensive. The home prices are expensive, and the mortgage rates or interest rates are high. I've got a double whammy working against me." So we'll just consider those to just be obstacles because each of those it's a separate discussion. But in general, if we consider them as one, I can understand why someone would not want to become a home buyer. But I think that then an argument would be once interest rates start coming down or the economy softens or something would happen that somehow brings prices down, whether that's because the cost of financing and mortgages, interest rates are down, or just the economy's softer. There are a lot of people who have been waiting on the sidelines for a long time.
Yeah.
And they are waiting, oh, not now, not too high. But then when there's a drop, I think that there's a strong argument to say, oh, that drop is not going to last long because there's tremendous pent-up demand that is going to sweep that up. So I think that should, and in fact, you may want to buy now before that happens because I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed.
I agree.
They're waiting, and then they wait And suddenly it happens. And now, whereas right now they can go shopping for a home and only a few people are knocking on the door, things drop, interest rates drop, the economy softens, and suddenly there's more interest. Now that you have 20 people wanting to buy that house, because it used to be at 600,000, now it's at 500,000. Now they're competing with. Is that
absolutely no, for sure? And I think if rates do come down, or when they come down, home prices are going to go up even more. And personally, I would rather buy a home if I'm getting a mortgage and I'm in a competitive market. I'd rather buy a home at a lower price and a higher rate, because eventually I can refinance that rate, assuming rates come down. But if I can buy, let's say you got the same home and you buy that home for $1 million at 2%, or I can buy it at $700,000 or $800,000 at 8%. Why would I buy it at $700,000 or $800,000 and then wait for the rates and then refinance them at some point? Once again, you're gambling a little bit on rates are going to come down, but I firmly believe they will. I think they'll come back down. I don't think we'll see 3% again, but I do think we'll see probably 5s and maybe even 4s at some point.
Let me ask you here, my wife Tiffany, you know my wife. We were having this conversation as recently as a day or two ago. We have difference of opinion on this, because we're talking with one of our kids is thinking of buying a home in the near future, not in the immediate term, in the next couple of years. And my wife was saying, hey, buy the house as soon as possible. And my argument was, well, we need to build up some liquidity, because she's mid-20s, right? A lot can happen. So I was arguing for a liquidity, build up a little cash reserve, some emergency cash, and then look to buy a home. And Tiffany said, no, buy it now, And I said, well, what about liquidity? So I welcome your thoughts on liquidity versus, because once you buy that house, you can say goodbye to liquidity. And so now you have no emergency. I guess you could borrow against the home and everything. But for all intents and purposes, your liquidity dries up. And so that liquidity versus that long-term investment of the house.
Sure. It depends on the person. So it depends on the person and their stomach for not having liquidity. So liquidity, just by definition, so we're on the same page, meaning cash on hand to be able to do different things in case of an emergency or whatever. So if I buy the house, I have no money now if my car breaks down, or I decide I want to go back for a master's degree. The money's gone because it's all been put in this house. And so if somebody can't sleep at nights because they don't have a little bit of cash reserve, don't do it. If it's going to make you a mess mentally, then it doesn't make then for me it's not worth. Even if financially it makes more sense, don't do it, because psychologically it's going to abuse it's going to kill you. But if you can live with it, then I'm an advocate of. I agree with your wife. I think you buy a house as soon as possible and I call it, once again, getting on the escalator. I made my daughter buy a house, talked her into buying a house 2 or 3 years ago, a condo. Got their foot in the door on the escalator. Now they're ready to step up to a home. They need a little more space, and she'd have no way of doing that had she not bought the condo 3 years ago. It's appreciated. They've gotten another probably $50,000 or something in equity that they didn't. It's not money they put in. It was just appreciation from the property, maybe a little bit in paying the mortgage down. But had they not done that, they would not be in a position to be able to move into a little bit bigger place now. And so I think the longer you wait, the harder it is to take that step, to the point of some people, they get to an age of where they just don't. I mean, I see people in there, I see people that are still renting. Renting's okay. I love renters. I have multiple rental properties. They're buying my renters are buying.
Yeah, you love renters because you're a landlord.
Yeah, they're buying me appreciating properties. I love renters. I love my renters, all of them. And but at some point, I'm not going to let my kids rent forever. I'm at least trying. I mean, I can't control their lives, but I'm going to try and convince them to get into a property as soon as possible.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah. The worst decision I ever made in real estate is not getting in sooner. I mean, I've bought multiple rentals. I've bought several properties. I've flipped over the years, bought and sold, fixed up. I wish I would have kept some of those as opposed to selling them. The first home I bought, I thought I was just getting taken to the rack in terms of price. I should have bought 10 of them. Those homes are selling for 3 or 4 times what I paid for that first home. back in the day.
Yeah, I see that same thing in stocks.
Yeah.
A lot of
Oh, yeah.
people say, "Oh, I don't want to buy now. It's so expensive." Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But because we don't know, there's, as I think you said before, there's never not a good time.
Yeah.
You buy.
There's
now,
better times than others,
but
you know that
in
after
general,
the fact. Yeah.
you don't know. You buy.
Yeah.
And as I've taught my kids from the very young age, the very basic principle of wealth creation, to the extent that we value wealth and we want wealth, is owning things, whether they're stocks or businesses that we own personally or indirectly through the stock market, or obviously real estate, either as our primary residence or renters, renting. Let's switch gears here for a minute and talk about real estate investing. Okay. So what's the state of real estate investing these days? Who's doing that? Is this big companies or just individuals and people like you, like, oh, I own multiple homes? And what's your advice to people who want to do real estate investing?
Okay. So most of the people that are investing right now are cash buyers. It doesn't make I'll give you an example. A client called me about a month ago. He said, there's a triplex for sale by my house. I want to buy it. Crunched the numbers. I looked at it and I thought, this makes no sense. Like, I looked at the numbers several times. I'm like, it makes no sense, because he was having to borrow a good chunk of the money. Borrowing and an investment rate is going to be higher than a normal, if you're buying to live in it,
is lower
than if you're buying as an investment. So he's looking at like 8%, 8.5%, something like that on a triplex, and it just doesn't pencil out. You run a cap rate on it of what the return on investment is, that kind of thing, and it just was not even, it made no sense. So I'm telling him, this doesn't make any sense, but he really wanted the property, the location he wanted. He said eventually it'll catch up, and I'm thinking, okay, I've educated you as much as I can, but you're a big boy. So if you want to pull the trigger. So I started the process, and then about a week later he called and said, oh, yeah, you were right. That didn't make sense. Now, for a cash buyer, it might make sense, because you're not having to borrow money. You're not having to borrow at 8%, and your return on investment is going to be way better without an interest rate. If you've got cash, depending on where else you can put it. If you can put it in the stock market or other places. And that's what an investor like that is looking at, is where can I put this money to get the most return on my investment? And with rents having gone up with a lot of investors, that's where they're putting it. And it's mainly cash buyers. Some of it's big company type stuff. Some are individuals.
But who has $800,000 to buy homes? A
lot of people do. Like, it's a third of the buyers right now, roughly a third of the buyers right now are cash buyers. So people have got money on the sidelines.
I'm just stunned.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a lot of people have
a lot of cash. This is not big institutional, big money.
Some
of that.
Yeah.
But you're saying there are a lot of people out there who just buy. They write a check for $800,000.
Yes. And I don't know.
And they get it. Now, I get a cash buyer from, maybe this is not a cash buyer who is selling their home, and that's not
Usually
a cash buyer. That's not a cash buyer.
It could be cash. I mean, if I
sell my home and then I have the money to buy the other.
That's cash. But these are people that
we're talking.
I have
people
my house.
who,
I'm living in it, and I'm strictly buying investment properties.
That's just amazing to me that they have that much money that they're just. I'm just going to write you a check.
Yeah, I mean, I had it.
Well, I think that's discouraging them, because if you're a seller, and Jane Doe walks in with a cash buyer and say, I'll just write you a check today, $800,000. And John Smith comes in and says, well, I don't know, I have $10,000. I have to go to the bank, blah, blah, blah. Who are they going to sell to? They're going to go to the cash buyer. And so it favors the rich.
So back to our initial conversation, right when we started, I talked about, if you're selling your house, from a seller's perspective, you don't care where the money's coming from. Right?
You just want a fast, easy transaction.
Want your money. But if you have two competing offers and one person's paying cash, it's not contingent on an appraisal. It's not contingent on financing. Maybe not even contingent on due diligence, like an inspection, as opposed to buyer B, who's getting a mortgage and they have to get an appraisal, and it is contingent on financing. They're probably getting an inspection. Which one are you going to take? You might even take a hit on the price to go with the cash buyer. They're going to close in 10 days. It really hurts the first-time home buyer, kind of back to our first-time home buyer, like our kids who are trying to get in the market to buy a house, because they can't compete with these people that are paying cash. And that the big institution investors are what really hurt the Utah market in terms of first-time home buyers being able to buy properties, because they were just getting snatched up by investors, and a lot of them turned into Airbnbs. Those have become more and more popular, and that's a good chunk of them are going to that kind of market range right now, or that marketplace.
Would you recommend? Let's talk about buying a condo versus a single family, because ownership, the difference between apartment living and owning, like a condo by definition, you own that, right?
You own the airspace.
You own
so
space.
Look at it this way. So a home, I own the land, the building, everything. So it's a quarter-acre lot. I own that. I own the dirt. I own the property, the walls, everything. A condo, I literally own the airspace within the unit.
Okay.
So and everything else is common. All the other, and now there can be a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, condos, you own the airspace. There's also a thing called a planned unit development, or PUD, which is kind of a hybrid between the two. So they're both a time and a place for both of them. I mentioned my daughter bought a condo. I actually own a condo right now as a rental. Condos you can usually get a little bit more bang for your buck. You can pay a little bit less and get a nicer place in a nicer area typically, but you're also going to have homeowners association dues, and there's a control issue in that sometimes HOAs tell you what you can and can't do with and to your property, which protects you, but it can hinder you if you're like, well, I want to park my RV in my parking spot, and they're like, well, no, RVs are no street parking. I have clients who wanted to offer on it's two families buying a property together. They couldn't qualify, or can't qualify for what they want, so they said, let's go together and buy a house together. And they were looking at a condo type project, PUD, but they were restricted the amount of cars you could park, and that kind of defeated. They're like, well, we can't buy it there because we can't fit. We have too many cars. So condos can restrict what you can and can't do, and it rubs people wrong sometimes. The condos tell me I can or can't do this. Plus the dues can go up or down. What you're paying, maybe you started at $200 a month, and now you're paying $350 a month for HOA dues. As opposed to a home, you might not get as much home, or you might buy it in a worse neighborhood, or maybe one that's a little more run down. But you control when you paint it, or when you put a fence up, or where you park. You have a lot more control and say. I personally prefer a home where I live, but there's a place for condos. My mom lived in a condo. It was great for her. My daughter's in one. It's been good for her. You have a little bit of an apartment feel. Like my daughter's in the middle unit, meaning there's somebody above her and someone below her, which she doesn't love, but it's worked out. It's been okay.
It's more affordable.
It's more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't find a house in the price range she was looking at, but she was able to get a condo and get her foot in the door, kind of on the escalator, and it was a tool that worked at the time.
It beats sleeping in the barn.
Yeah, or renting. I mean, she could have been renting the last 3 years and had no appreciation, and spent $30,000 in rent, which is down the toilet. So it kind of comes back to what. So financially, I would probably push you or steer you maybe to buy a house if you could afford it. But if not, then a condo is still good. Maybe not as great as a house, but I still think it's a great investment to do. It's just that control thing that sometimes they can control what you can't. This is kind of something to think about. Is if you do buy a condo and you just think, well, I'm going to rent it, or I'm going to buy it as an investment, or I'll live in it and then rent it down the road. Most HOAs have restrictions on the number of rentals you can do. So meaning if I've got a 100-unit complex, they might only allow 20 of those units to be rentals. And then, so if they already have 20 rentals and you're like, well, I want to rent it, you have to go on a waiting list for someone else that their condo sells, someone moves in it and lives in it as an owner occupant, and then you could maybe rent yours. So sometimes that can be a problem for people if they think, well, I'll just rent it, and you can't, because the HOA restricts what you can and can't rent.
So we've established it is a good time to buy. It's always a good time to buy. And, I think listeners, this just really has reminded me of the importance of getting on the escalator. I always talk about getting on the train.
Yep.
There's no time like today. Buy assets, do what you need to do to make it happen. And in the long run, it's going to pay off. Right. So let's talk about logistically what happens from both sides, right?
Sure.
Because you have the money side, the mortgage broker side, and then the actual real estate. So let's actually talk about the real estate side first. Okay. And that is the house. I want to buy a house. I want to buy a condo. I want to get in the game. I want you to talk about the value of a realtor I'm a big fan of realtor. I think they pay for themselves time and again, and I think you would probably agree.
Yeah.
But maybe even play devil's advocate where they're not that important. So I have a conversation about that. How you find a realtor, right? Because there are a lot of realtors out there, right? So you just ask a friend. How do you vet a good that? And then we'll pivot over to the lending side. Same thing. How do you begin that process? Like pre-qualification, and do you go to a bank to do that, or do you hire someone like you, a mortgage broker, that will guide you through that process?
Absolutely.
And then we'll wrap up. So fire away.
Okay. So I get this question a lot too. Someone will call me, their parents or something, and say, "Hey Jim, I'm so and so. I just graduated from college, ready to get a house. I have no idea what to do. Like where do I start? What do I do?" And which is kind of dovetailing into what you just said. There's two sides, real estate and mortgage side to a transaction. I do both. Once again, I can't do it on the same transaction, but I'm going to give you kind of a quick synopsis for both. So let's talk real estate like you mentioned. We'll do real estate first. So when buying a house, you see let's say there's 1,000 homes on the market in Utah, and you trying to decide, well, which one is for me? You have an agent. I always recommend as a buyer that you have an agent. Most homes every home that's listed, it's listed with XYZ real estate company, has hired a company or a real estate agent, broker to sell their home. And in most cases, this is changing a little bit in the arena right now, but in most cases, that agent or that company has agreed to pay another brokerage if they bring a buyer. So there's advertising in the state of Utah, hey, any agents out there, we're selling this home, and if you have a client that's interested, bring them, and we will pay you in some instances to bring that client to us. So I always recommend as a buyer use an agent. There's a few exceptions to that, kind of to play devil's advocate. If you find a home that's maybe for sale by owner, or what we call in the business a FSBO, that just means that's the acronym for sell by owner. Sometimes they'll give you a deal if they don't have to pay an agent. They might say, yeah, well, not 10 grand off the price or something. Mm-hmm. Super risky in my opinion, just because you don't have a professional that knows the ins and outs and different things that can go wrong. I agree an agent pays for themselves, and I would never buy a house without one, but you could in theory do that in that scenario. So the agent starts sending you properties that meet your criteria in a certain geographic area, maybe a price range, maybe a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, whatever's important to you. They'll start sending you those properties on a daily basis or week or however often you want to receive them. And then you'll kind of go peruse through those, just the pictures and the description, and you might narrow it down to say 10. And then you'll go drive by yourself usually, and drive by the neighborhoods and the houses and say, does it still work? Mm-hmm. Maybe you drive by one house and there's a house next door is just trash. You're like, I don't want to live next door to that. So you eliminate some houses. You maybe narrow it down to say 3 or 4 or 5 houses. Then you and your agent schedule time to go through those homes. And you actually go through, the agent will take you through, they'll set up appointments to go through the homes and do all that. What you find you find the house. This is the one you're going to offer on. You write up an offer with the agent. It's a 6-page contract, and it spells out the terms of the price and a lot of other things. And they accept the offer, and now you've got to get the money to buy the house. And that's usually about a 30-day process. Once you put the house under contract, when you close, 30 days on average.
And I suppose there's some negotiation. You put an offer and you say, I'm going to offer $500,000, and they say, no, we want $520 or the listing or whatever. And
so that's
a given that there's some.
Yeah, so I did a very simple real estate side, but there's a lot of nuances.
At a certain point, you agree upon a price.
Yeah, it can go bounce back and forth, counter offer, but eventually, assuming you agree on a price. But we could have a whole session on that in terms of multiple offers, how you deal with that, just all the different nuances, short sales, and there's so many different things that can come up in a real estate transaction. But that's just super simple.
So you've agreed upon a price. And then you switch over to the financing side of it.
So
now, are you doing the financing perhaps kind of simultaneously behind the scenes, or do you kind of have to wait for that to start the finance?
Yes and no. So I always recommend, we maybe should have done financing first, because I recommend, so if someone comes to me first thing and says, I'm ready to go look at a house, my first thing is, let's find out what you qualify for. Because I don't want to go find a house, because then they're going to fall in love with the $700,000 house, but they only qualify for $500,000. So now the $500,000 home's never going to meet up to the $700,000.
That's interesting, because my intuition, when I said the two, where did I go to? My intuition, real estate.
Yeah.
And you're like, actually, no. Let's start with the finance side, because it serves no purpose to be searching for the bigger house that you can't afford.
That's right.
Okay.
So normally what I would do is say, let's find out what you qualify for. And I can do that in literally 5 minutes over the phone. So first thing I would do is contact, this goes for the real estate agent and or a mortgage person. Both of them, I would 100% go off of a recommendation. I would never Google search it. I would never, they don't have yellow pages anymore, but I would talk to friends, neighbors, parents, brothers, cousins. Who did you use? Who did you like?
Good
did you have a good
experience. Yeah.
I'm all about relationships and people that did it right the first time and know what they're doing, and people trust them. And all of my business comes that way. I do zero advertising. All of my business is repeat and referral. And so I would talk to different people, neighbors, friends, people at your church, wherever, and just say, hey, we're looking at buying a house. Do you know anybody that does mortgages? Or have you ever gotten a mortgage? Could be a bank, could be a credit union, could be a broker like myself. And that's where you're going to sit down and go over some numbers and find out, that income, credit, down payment. We could do a whole session on that in terms of all the stuff you have to bring in to document. But really, I can tell you over the phone in about 5 minutes. If you tell me what your income is, how you're paid.
You're going to give you a
got
ballpark.
assets. I give you an idea and say, you qualify for a $500,000 house with this amount. Here's what your payment's going to be, blah, blah, blah. I can do it pretty darn quick. So once you know what you qualify for, and at that point, some people will say, well, should we run my credit? And my answer is usually no. I usually say, let's wait until we find a house, because credit can expire and you may have to pull it again. The only exception to that is if you think you might have some glitches in your credit, then I want to know what we're up against. Because I'd hate to have you find the house, then go pull your credit and find out, oh, wow, you had a bankruptcy and a foreclosure and collections, and you're not buying a house anytime soon. And we just wasted all this time looking for houses when you're not even in the ballpark. But if people think, yeah, my credit's pretty good, I've been, I usually kind of trust people that they know what they're talking. Occasionally I'll pull it and they're like, what is happening? So you get the credit run. So once I get kind of that 5-minute introduction and feel good about your financials, then I say, okay, now let's start sending you properties. And then I don't come back to the mortgage really until we find a house. You can give me like pay stubs, W-2s, bank statements, but I usually wait on that until we find a house, or you may send it to me. Just the reason I wait is you have to keep it current. And so if I get a bunch of stuff from you initially, I might have to get it all again if it's 6 months before we buy a house. So depending on how quick you're thinking about moving, if you're like, we're going to buy a house in the next 30 days, then I'll get all your stuff now. If you're like, yeah, we're just kicking tires, it's going to be 6 months. I'm like, let's wait. Don't worry about it. And then we'll start showing you houses. And then once we find a house and we start making offers, then you're going to get me all your stuff, and we're going to go hit the mortgage full steam at the same time we kind of write the offer.
Jim, we could go on for hours. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming into our studio today and talking about mortgages and lending and credit, all these things. Hopefully we'll have you on the show again, because there's just like you said, we could talk more about this and more about that. But we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much for joining. This is Benjamin Driggs, President of Navigate Financial and Financial Advisor. With us today in our office studio is Jim Barnett, a longtime real estate broker and a mortgage broker as well. We appreciate him coming and taking time with us today. And be sure to reach out to us, and we'll send Jim's information separately. But reach out to us if you have any questions. Be happy to help you out and steer you along the way. This is Ben Driggs signing off. Have a good day.